Personal space was first studied academically by Robert Sommer, who published an article in 1959 studying seating arrangements and the amount of interaction that different arrangements were correlated with. This study, while interesting to me, it languished until the following work of Edward Hall, who used the term proxemics and defined it as the interrelated observations and theories of humans' use of space as a specialized elaboration of culture. So, to sound like slightly less of a huge nerd, proxemics is how the space between people is informed by and affects the way that we interact with each other. And I tell you the boring history because you need to know that even though the concept of personal space seems fundamental and intuitive, it hasn't really been recognized as a thing until relatively recently. This means that we often lack the language to really talk about it in a useful and constructive way. Keep that in mind as we continue. We use personal space to preserve our safety, establish relationships, empathize, communicate trust, and set boundaries. The issue is that we frequently do these things without really thinking about what we're doing. For most people, the practice of proxemics comes so naturally that they don't ever question what they're doing or why until their personal space is violated. But without knowing what's happening under the hood, it's easy to get trapped in a situation where each person is setting their personal space without regard for the other. I've been in a conversation with a close talker, someone who wanted to stand on my toes while speaking, and I'm the kind of person who would much rather have every living human being in another zip code if at all possible, so I would take a step away, establishing something a little closer to my comfortable personal space. But that left them out in the cold, so they stepped in. So I stepped back, so they stepped in, and we did this dance for a bit until I made excuses so that we could sit down. What was happening was that I was communicating my personal space in one way. And when that communication failed to adequately establish my boundaries, I didn't try a different method, but instead I just tried again for 10 minutes. I'm a slow learner. Another thing that happened is that the person with whom I was speaking also did not recognize my discomfort, and I did not feel comfortable at that time with being more confrontational about my needs. We may, in any interaction, end up on either side of this situation, so it's important to identify and respond appropriately to signs of discomfort in the other party. I don't know about you, but I have never been in a situation where someone said, "Hey, I'm not comfortable with how close you are standing, and I'd appreciate it if you take a step back." Most of the time, we don't need to be so upfront about it because a big part of what defines the size of our personal space is our culture and our upbringing. People who grew up in the city tend to have relatively small personal spaces, and if you've ever been on crowded public transit, you can probably imagine why. Similarly, if your closest neighbor growing up was a scarecrow, you are probably a bit more like me and are extremely uncomfortable with standard conversational distances. This means that since you likely hang out with people who share a culture with you, you likely have similarly sized personal spaces, and this issue just doesn't come up. Or if it does, you may feel that it's a you problem and not a real problem. Here's a pro tip for life, by the way. If it's a you problem, it's not a non-problem. It's still a problem that needs addressing. Other things can have a significant effect on the size of someone's personal space too. Things like gender, physical size, the environment, both parties' familiarity with the environment, their personal histories with each other, the situational script that's in play, whether or not they're alone, and literally anything that affects our experiences, interpretation, or feelings about the situation. And feelings do have an impact on personal space. While I was researching the history of personal space, I found a study published in 2009 where researchers at the California Institute of Technology worked with a woman who had damage to her amygdala. She consistently rated any interpersonal distance as perfectly comfortable for her, even standing nose to nose with a researcher. If you tried this with almost anyone, they would display clear nonverbal signs of discomfort, such as avoiding eye contact or compulsive giggling, but this subject didn't. When asked to place herself at a distance that she thought would be most comfortable for other people, she did guess closer than the average distance preferred by other subjects, but still greater than her personal comfort, which, remember, basically doesn't exist. This suggests that even when someone does not themselves feel uncomfortable, they are still capable of recognizing the social space needs of others. This is significant because the amygdala processes strong emotions, such as disgust, which could very easily be a big factor in why we don't want to be standing on each other's toes and breathing the same air. From this, we can reasonably assume that there is something primally, deeply uncomfortable about having someone in your personal space, which sounds like common sense, but now that someone did it as science, we can say it with a certain amount of confidence. It is not a rational situation, which means that the onus is on the person who is comfortable and therefore more rational to recognize that their conversational partner isn't, and adjust the situation to something more agreeable to everyone involved. Hall's model of interpersonal distances of man, which, by the way, apparently the 60s was just like the Wild West of pretentious social research, so the field is littered with these ridiculous grand names for things. I love it. It's wonderful. Anyway, it sets social distance at 4 to 7 feet. So when interacting with acquaintances, this is normally where we want to be. Violating personal space triggers activity in the amygdala, and we know that no one listens well, speaks clearly, or communicates effectively when they are in a state of high emotion, such as fear, disgust, or anger. Hall's model also interprets personal space as though it were a circle. And I don't think that's quite true. Most people are less comfortable with people behind them, and so they have a very large space in their blind spot. Also, standing shoulder to shoulder with someone, even a stranger, is considerably more comfortable than if you were facing them. So, what can you do to become better at recognizing and reacting to the personal space needs of others in order to communicate more effectively? First, pay attention to the body language of the person you're speaking with. If they lean away from you, even if they don't move their feet, there's a good chance that they're uncomfortable with the situation. You may have heard the phrase on the back foot, which is usually used to describe someone who's defensive. You'll hear it used in sports and debate contexts, and it's specifically referencing this defensive stance. Someone who is putting their actual physical weight on their back foot may be feeling unsafe and be trying to protect themselves. Someone who avoids eye contact may be trying to appear non-threatening or non-confrontational. Someone who crosses their arms in front of their chest may be feeling vulnerable. Notice that I do not give you direct, if they do this, then it means that directions here. Interpreting body language is highly contextual, and no one gesture means anything. If there's more than one sign, though, they add up, like circumstantial evidence. If you suspect that the person you're speaking with is uncomfortable, you can take a step back and increase the distance between you. There's no problem with doing that, and if it is the space that's the issue, they might not even have noticed that you moved. If they feel that you're now too far away, they'll step in, but you've given them the opportunity to adjust for their own comfort. Hall's range of social space is 4 to 7 feet, but in my anecdotal experience, in an unobstructed area, people will generally come to just within arm's reach in order to have a conversation. My professional recommendation is that you try to stick to the far end of that spectrum, closer to 6 or 7 feet. It's better to be further and have everyone feeling safe and comfortable than to be too close and be freaking someone out. The second thing that you can do is to be verbally assertive when it's your personal space that is being pressed upon. Remember that most people set their conversational distance without ever actually thinking about it, so directly asking for a little more space can help them to become more aware of the situation, and it articulates a clear boundary that you need for a comfortable and productive conversation. You can also offer a change in environment that will adjust both parties' needs for personal space if you don't feel comfortable being directly confrontational. If you go for a bit of a walk, you can adjust as necessary as you move, as well as take advantage of the comfort and implied teaming that happens when you are side by side with someone. Just sitting down with someone changes the situation. It makes it calmer, and the added benefit that chairs don't move like people do goes a long way. Withdrawing your attention to some degree can also indicate that you need more space, and many people will observe this need without thinking about it. If someone's typing and you're talking to them, you usually stand a little further away and try and be less obtrusive. In home environments, cleaning tasks or food preparation usually do the job pretty nicely. What do you think? Can you remember a time when you had to manage your personal space? How did it go? Put your stories, additions, or corrections in the comments, and we will talk about some of them next time. Be smart, stay safe. Bye.